guys, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie, and spring is along its way. So one of the most exciting things about the start of spring, besides all the other great stuff on the farm, is that we get to start our seedlings so that they're ready to go out when the frost passes. One of the most important things about starting seeds is that we need a good foundation to plant them in. So how do we make a good foundation? We need to understand fertilizers and nutrients and what these are going to do for our plants so that they can really flourish and produce a lot of food, good and tasty food for us throughout the summertime. So in order to understand the nutrients for plants, I've got it all written out here so that you can see it as I'm talking, is to first understand that there's going to be three sets of nutrients that your plant needs. Number one, you have macronutrients. Number two, you have secondary nutrients. And number three, you have micronutrients. The most important are the macronutrients. Think about it like a Big Mac. It's large. It's going to be the highest quantity of nutrients and the most important things to the plants. These are known as your Npk ratio. And this is a universal thing, so whenever you buy any type of formulated soil or you buy any type of fertilization, you'll always see a number somewhere on the back of the bottle that's stated as a number, dash another number, dash another number. And again, this is known as your NPK ratio. Those are your macronutrients. Those are going to be your nitrogen, your phosphates, and your potash. As you can see, your nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. I know you all probably know what nitrogen is, but phosphate and potash, that's a little bit confusing. So when you look at it, phosphate, if you want to remember it easier, think about it as phosphorus. And potash, think about it as potassium. The reason that we don't actually call these nutrients phosphorus and potassium is because it's not pure phosphorus molecules, nor is it pure potassium molecules. What we've done is we've taken ion atoms and made ionic bonds. So your phosphate is actually known as P2O5. So in other words, we have two atoms of phosphorus combined through ionic bonds with 5 atoms of oxygen. And then your potash is known as K2O. K stands for potassium. So again, you have 2 potassiums mixed with 1 oxygen, and that's why it's known as potash and phosphates rather than pure phosphorus and potassium. So don't get too confused on that. It's really not a big deal. It's just down to more specific chemistry, if you want to put it that way. So you can just call it phosphorus and potassium if you want. Now the question is, why are these nutrients so important? What do they do for our plants? Well, nitrogen is going to be your overall basis of nutrients. That's going to have to do with every function that your plant does through photosynthesis, growing, its roots, reproduction, etc. So just always know that nitrogen is pretty much like us eating food in general. It is the baseline of nutrients for the plant. Second, we have our phosphates. What do our phosphates do for us? Our phosphates deal with our metabolic processes. It's going to deal with photosynthesis, energy transport, and the synthesis and breakdown of our carbohydrates. And phosphorus is also going to be great for a root system. Any type of things that grow off of bulbs and things like that, things that have very large organs underneath the soil, are going to need more phosphorus. If I change the page over, oops, sorry, wrong way. Change our page over, we then have our potash. Though potash is listed third in our set of numbers, potash is actually second to nitrogen. It is extremely important. It's going to deal with all the vitalities of what we want out of growing our plant. It's going to deal with the shape, the vibrancy of the color, the size of your plant, and the taste of your plant. The most important thing that's going to affect all of this is that potassium deals with the opening and closing of the stomata in the plant. If you don't know what the stomata is, what that is it's almost like the pores in our skin. Every plant has pores underneath the leaf that are going to open and close based on how much water and nutrient the plant needs through the leaves. So what it's going to deal with is the CO2 uptake during photosynthesis by opening and closing our stomata. It also deals with activating the enzymes to produce something called ATP. ATP is adenylyl, it's so hard to say, adenosine triphosphates. And those are all going to deal with the energy for chemical processes that happen in the plant tissues, just like we have tissues in our body. That's what ATP is used for. It's a form of energy within the plant. It's also going to deal, potassium, with what's called osmoregulation. Osmoregulation is the regulation of water. So it's dealing with this again with the stomata by losing water from opening the stomata, and it's also going to deal with the uptake of water through the roots. It's going to help both of those processes in a great deal. By regulating osmoregulation, it also improves with drought resistance. If a plant has the required amount of potassium, it's going to be less susceptible to drought. So especially in our plants in here or outside when you're gone at work all day and it's a sunny, hot day and you're not able to deal with it, it's not going to be so burdened by the lack of moisture in the soil, which is great. It also primarily, overallly deals with protein synthesis. Everyone knows what proteins are. Those are very important to plants along with us. It also activates the enzymes that are going to deal with starch synthesis, and it activates all the enzymes in the body overall that deal with any sort of growth. Any growth enzymes that's going to regulate those enzymes, and that's why those are so very important. So again, you have your N, nitrogen, your P, which is your phosphates or phosphorus, and your K, which is your potash or your potassium, so NPK. Now, so that you guys don't get confused, sometimes when you're buying bags, you'll also see a fourth number up there. That fourth number is going to deal with the ratio of your secondary and your micronutrients. So it's not as important, but don't get confused if you see that fourth number. Now, when we're dealing with this NPK ratio, two things that you have to remember is that it's both based on a ratio and on a percentage. So if you have an NPK ratio, and say it's of 8, 4, and 2. That means that I have 8% nitrogen, 4% phosphates, and 2% potassium. But you also have to remember that it's also a ratio. So that means that if you break this down, just like in math, we go to our smallest decimals, that means you're going to have 4 parts nitrogen, 2 parts phosphates, and 1 part potash. So remember that, it's a percentage and it's also a ratio. Now you might get confused and say, well, how is that a percentage? Because if you add 8, 4, and 2, you only end up with 14%. So where is the other 86%? What's the other 86% of that fertilizer? That's going to be all your secondary nutrients, your micronutrients. If the fertilizer contains any of it, you can check the side of the package, just like you check a label on the food that you buy. And the rest of it is going to be all your hydrogen and oxygen. So don't fret when those numbers don't add up to 100%. It's because there's other things that are in those fertilizer besides the NPK. Now, after all that, you've been hearing me talk a lot about our secondary and micronutrients. So what are our secondary and micronutrients? Our secondary and micronutrients, first of all, dealing with our secondary, are going to be the second most important to our macronutrients. Those are going to be calcium, known as Ca, sulfur, known as F, and magnesium, known as Mg. Those are your secondary nutrients. Moving on from that, you have your micronutrients, which are your smallest amount of nutrients. Now, don't get me wrong, they are still just as important as all of our other nutrients. They're just going to come in much smaller amounts. Those are going to deal with our iron, copper, boron, manganese, zinc, and molybdenum. Those are your micronutrients. Now, don't think because they're micro that you're not going to need them. They are still very important to the growth of the plant. Again, they're just going to start in much smaller amounts. You can still find those on your bag. The ratio of those nutrients are going to be written on the side, just like you can read the labels on your food again. And they're going to be down to 0.01%. 0.1%. Very small amounts, but still very important to your plants. Now, you don't always have to remember all of those nutrients when you're making your soil. It's mainly those macro and secondary nutrients that you're going to have to remember. Now, it's going to be a little bit weird. I don't remember the exact word for it, anagram that I've come up with. You can come up with your own. To remember all these nutrients are never play kickball carrying someone's machete. So never, as in nitrogen, play, as in your phosphates, kickball, as in your potash, carrying, as in your calcium, someone's, as in sulfur, machete, as in magnesium. So never play kickball carrying someone's machete, which is very good advice otherwise, but just a little way to remember those nutrients. But now that we've learned all of that, and once you have that understanding down of what your plants need, we can start to make our soil and start to plant, which is the most exciting part.